What's on, ladies and gentlemen? My name's Ross, I like games, and today, well, we're in the final stretch of Transformers TCG spoilers for Wave 4, War for Cybertron Siege 2. But we've got a couple very exciting characters still to look at, and we need to start off today having a look at another new combiner. It is Captain Omega Supreme. Now, just like the other combiner that we had a look at, well, just a couple of days ago, Skytread as it were, what we end up with is this weird combiner whereby we got 3 single-sided cards that all combine into one big old transformer. There's no actual flipping that ever goes on here. But hey-ho, it still looks very fun indeed. Now, of course, we have had Omega Supreme in the Transformers TCG before. It came around as a promo card in Loot Crate, or it was a box topper promo in Australia, a pre-release or release day promo in the UK, etc. Well, now it's a combiner, and I'm going to be honest with you, this one looks like a huge amount of fun. Although, like the other Omega Supreme, very expensive, you're not going to get much more with this. So it is a 22-star combiner, which means you're going to be playing it with some star cards as well. But we should probably start off by having a look at the constituent parts. So Omega Supreme Tank is a 7-cost character, 3 attack, 9 health, 2 defense. For a 7 cost, that is bad. These stats are not good enough. We expect more. And the skill is alright, but it's not terribly amazing. So what we end up with is, when this attacks, you may scrap 2 cards from your hand and do 1 damage to an enemy. So when you attack, you can just do 1 damage anywhere you like, but you've got to scrap 2 cards from your hand in order to do this. That's not necessarily a deal breaker per se, but it means we're going to need some kind of draw power to go along with this, and we're going to be looking for heavy draw power. Something like Pep Talk is going to arguably be a little bit weak here. We're going to be looking for something like Work Overtime that draws until you've got 4 cards in hand, because you're often going to have very few cards in hand. Or we're going to be looking for something like System Reboot, which will just put you to a 4-card hand. That's the kind of stuff we're looking for here. We're looking for heavy draw, because if you're constantly discarding 2 cards from your hand, it's not going to be long before you've just not got any cards in hand. If you're going to play this, you are going to need aggressive draw. Because we see a very similar thing coming in with Omega Supreme's Spaceship here. When this attacks, you may scrap 2 cards from your hand. If you do, scrap an enemy upgrade. And look, scrapping an enemy upgrade is absolutely brilliant, because there's a million different things your opponent might be trying to use, whether it's something like Force Field to protect themselves, or whether it's something like Flamethrower to do a little bit of extra damage. And this means you can always reliably get rid of them. And then we've got plenty of cards to get rid of upgrades. We got Ramming Speed, and if you don't want to use an orange card, we've got Vaporize, which is quite good, because it's exactly the same, but, you know, it's on a blue icon, which is nice, gives you a little bit of extra options here. But the point is that you can't always find them. I mean, Bashing Shield sees a lot of play to get rid of armor, because it's got that green icon, so you can basically guarantee you draw into it. Well, here it's a character on the field, so you can guarantee to get rid of that armor, and that is lovely, but you've got to scrap 2 cards from your hand in order to do so. And if you're regularly scrapping 2 cards from your hand using Omega Supreme Tank, and scrapping 2 cards from your hand using Omega Supreme Spaceship, it's going to get very, very awkward very, very quickly. So I'm not a huge fan of it unless you go aggressive draw. If you go aggressive draw, we're cool. Now, the combining mechanic on Omega Supreme is completely unique as well. When your opponent reshuffles their deck, if you have the other 2, because there's 3 parts to Omega Supreme, on the battlefield or in your KO area, combine them with this into Captain Omega Supreme. Now, these are going to be the only characters you have. So essentially the deal is this: if your opponent reshuffles their deck before you run out of your 3 characters, you combine. If they manage to not, you don't. Now, we're only playing 40-card decks, and most decks have some kind of bold, some kind of tough, some kind of draw power, something along these lines, so you will end up shuffling your deck, but this is going to vastly depend on the kind of deck you're playing against, because the reality is there are a whole bunch of decks that are going to run out of their deck very quickly and then reshuffle, and there are a whole bunch of decks that aren't. When Nemesis Prime first started seeing play, which is when it was released because Nemesis Prime is amazing, at least it was at the beginning, people started playing it as an I'm going to run through my deck as fast and as often as possible because of the skill, whereby when you ran out of deck and had to reshuffle, you put the bottom card of your deck under him and got +3 attack. But then as time went by, people started playing slightly slower lists where you do this once, maybe twice in a game, and then all of a sudden, because there was also a lot more blue, and then all of a sudden this wasn't such a big issue. So it really is going to depend how fast your opponent runs through their deck. You'll do it in a lot of games, but you will find your opponent doing very awkward calculations going, right, well, if I don't go for an extra bold here, it's a turn later till they can combine, and that's quite nice. Now, we never actually mentioned the stats for the spaceship here, so what we've got is 4 attack, 12 health, 0 defense. The stats are fine for a 7 cost, other than defense, which is very bad. Now, the main one here, Omega Supreme Base, is an 8 cost, and it is the best of them. No, we do not like the attack of 0, that's terrible. Health of 12, defense of 1 is fine, but on an 8 cost, we would be expecting 4, 12, 2, so 0, 12, 1... I mean, you can already see it is a significant downgrade here in terms of stats. Now, in terms of the skills, it actually has the best one of them. When you defend, you do 2 damage to the attacker, and your opponent scraps the top 2 cards of their deck, which of course means they get closer to having to take their scrap pile and make it into their deck, which means you get closer to actually combining, which is lovely. And I love this. When your opponent attacks it, you do 2 damage to the attacker, and then your opponent scraps the top 2 cards of their deck. Here's the problem. This doesn't start the combination. So it says right there on the card, this can combine with Omega Supreme Tank and Spaceship to form Captain Omega Supreme, but it doesn't actually do the combining. What that means is, if your opponent reshuffles their deck, and you've only got Omega Supreme Base out, not the other 2, you don't combine. Which means, why is your opponent ever going to attack the base? When they attack the base, you do 2 damage to the attacker, and they scrap the top 2 cards of their deck. But if they take out the other 2 first, then you're not combining. The one method we have of combining this, unless there's something we're missing, is when your opponent reshuffles their deck, but that is only if you've got the tank or the spaceship out, and then the other 2 out or in the KO area. So this really does give your opponent a huge, giant signpost, as it were, and the sign says, don't go after the base, go after the other 2 first. And finally, when we do combine, we end up with Captain Omega Supreme. And there's quite a lot I like about this. Firstly, the stats are pretty great. It's a 22 cost, you would imagine so. It's got 33 health, which is just the combined health of the other 2. Remember that a combiner starts untapped with all the damage from the other characters combined and keeps 1 upgrade in each slot. Which means as soon as your opponent shuffles their deck, you get Omega Supreme and you are untapped. But of course, your opponent then can shuffle their deck during their turn, try and make it happen that way, so they get the first hit on Omega Supreme when it's rolling. But still, 7 attack and 3 defense, pretty high. And then it's got Pierce 4. You do at least 4 damage when attacking, but not more than your total attack. I.e., if you've got Pierce 4 and attack 3, you only do 3, but given you've got a base 7, you could play something like a Piercing Blaster to put you up to Pierce 7, and you would still guarantee doing the 7 damage, because your attack still wouldn't be higher than your Pierce. Pierce 4 is great. And when you attack, you may scrap 4 cards from your hand, and then scrap all upgrades from all of your opponent's characters, and do 1 damage to each enemy. Now that is phenomenal. We saw Vandalize back in Wave 2. Now Vandalize is, well, it's a star card. So it takes some of the cost of your team to actually play it. And it gets rid of all weapons or armor or utility, but not all of them. This gets rid of all of your opponent's upgrades without getting rid of your own. And you do 1 damage to each enemy, so it's kind of like an armed hovercraft. It's phenomenal! But you've got to scrap 4 cards from your hand to do so. This is why I'm such of a fan of cards like Work Overtime and System Reboot, because they will reset your hand to 4 cards, which you're going to need in order to actually get this working. This asks a lot, frankly. This is asking for an awful lot to get this rolling. A huge amount. Because if you don't have 4 cards in hand, it's just got PS4. And PS4 is great, but you're going through an awful lot to actually get this rolling. And then the tank and the spaceship ask you to scrap 2 cards from your hand, each. And then the base is really good when attacked, but it doesn't actually trigger combination. So your opponent is not going to go after the base, they're just going to go after the tank and the spaceship, because why would they not, frankly? It just makes sense. Leave the base there, because it does not combine when your opponent reshuffles their deck. So, yeah. This is awkward. Now, I do like going ranged here, because Captain Omega Supreme and the tank and the spaceship are all ranged. That means you can use armed hovercraft, marksmanship, etc. Get a cheeky damage deck going on. Bearing in mind, Omega Supreme, the captain, and the tank both have cheeky damage going on as well. So there is a nice cheeky damage deck to be made here. But the thing is that only the base is a specialist, so yeah, you've got those great cards like Field Communicator, but they can only go on the base. Now, the spaceship is a spaceship, but honestly, the only card you've actually got here is Unconventional Flying Object, which revolves around flipping, which you're not going to be doing, because there is no other mode. And the best thing about tanks really is hunker down to get some extra flipping and some extra armor on. But again, there will be no extra flipping here because there is no bot mode. And sure, Omega Supreme is a melee character, so you've got stuff like Power Sword and Body Armor, but those cards are dead cards in your hand before you actually combine. And we're left with an extremely awkward character. It is an Autobot leader, which means you can use Matrix of Leadership. But if I'm honest with you, right, yes, I love the +1 attack, but it gives your other characters +1 attack and PS1, but your other characters won't be there because your other characters add up to 22 stars. You ain't got space for any other characters. And once you combine, they're all in this. So, from a design point, I adore Captain Omega Supreme. I love that we've got a new way to combine. That is wonderful. But we start off with 3 single-sided characters, none of which have good stats, 2 of which make you wreck your own hand in order to use, only 2 of which can trigger combinations. If they get KO'd first, your opponent can just stop you ever getting the captain out. When you get the captain out, you got to scrap 4 cards from your hand to properly use it, which is awkward. And other than range, you don't have any other traits which go around more than 1 character, meaning that a lot of these cards you'd want to use end up being too risky and you don't end up using them. The entire point of this is, I adore this from a design standpoint, but when I'm sitting here looking at the card trying to figure out what decks to put it in, I end up a little bit confused because I don't know if it's worth it. This character demands a lot from you as a deck builder to actually make work, and I'm not sure if it's quite good enough. Don't get me wrong, right? If you get Captain Omega Supreme out quickly, which incidentally is up to your opponent, not you, And if you can keep 4 cards in your hand, such that you keep getting to use your skill every turn, and you're there with a 7 attack, 33 health, 3 defense monster with PS4 that every turn is doing 1 damage to each enemy and getting rid of all upgrades. Oh yes, I love this. Especially if you're dropping stuff like armed hovercraft and marksmanship as well, which is going to be very difficult to do, incidentally, while keeping 4 cards in hand. I love it, but I really struggle to see how this is going to work and be viable competitively. Sorry. But hey, if you think I'm wrong, I would genuinely love to hear from you in the comment section, because it sounds like a lot of fun. So let me know in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, and follow me on Twitter at the Wossy, where we talk about games like Transformers and anything else that takes our fancy. And do please consider checking out patreon.com/PTCGradio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts every week, and all kinds of other fun stuff. But by far the most important thing, as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching Wossy Plays.